From 1764 until 1774, the British Parliament passed several acts and levied new taxes on the colonies, which helped trigger the American Revolution. This video looks at 4 acts, including the Sugar, Stamp, Townshend, and Intolerable Acts.
The Sugar Act of 1764 was a British law meant to regulate trade, improve tax collection, and reduce smuggling in the colonies.
Parliament turned to the colonies to help repay Britain's huge war debts from the French and Indian War and cover future protection costs.
In 1764, Parliament passed the Sugar Act as part of the Revenue Acts. While the Sugar Act reduced taxes on molasses and sugar, it empowered aggressive tax collection by officials. The Sugar Act did raise taxes on several other products and limited the export of lumber and iron from the colonies. John Otis and I led the colonial resistance to the Sugar Act. The economy and consumers suffered, while merchants went bankrupt. Parliament didn't have the right to its aggressive taxation measures against the colonies. Public opposition to the Sugar Act was limited, though some merchants stopped buying British luxury goods. Real resistance would start a year later with the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act of 1765 was an act of the British Parliament that imposed new taxes in the colonies to help repay Britain's 7 years' war debt and cover the costs of protecting the colonies.
The Stamp Act was passed on March 22, 1765. It required colonists to pay a tax on all paper products, including newspapers, legal documents, books, etc. Also, all paper materials had to be produced on officially stamped paper from Britain.
Violent protests broke out in the colonies against the aggressive tax collectors and officials. I insisted, no taxation without representation. In October, 9 colonies met in New York and called the Stamp Act Congress to protect Parliament's right to levy taxes on the colonies.
After intense pressure, Parliament repealed the Stamp Act on March 18, 1766. However, on the same day, Parliament passed the Declaratory Act, reaffirming its rights to regulate and tax the colonies.
The Stamp Act and future taxes, such as the Townshend Acts, brought the colonies closer to war with Britain. The Townshend Acts were British laws passed in 1767 that placed taxes on glass, lead, paint, paper, and tea imported into the colonies.
The 4 acts were intended to replace tax revenue lost after the highly unpopular Stamp Act was repealed in 1766.
Britain was badly indebted after the 7 Years' War and needed cash to prop up the failing East India Company, so it turned to the colonies to help cover some of the costs. As I've always said, no taxation without representation. So in 1768, the Massachusetts House of Representatives and other colonial legislatures sent petitions to King George III demanding the repeal of these acts. The governor subsequently dissolved the Massachusetts legislature.
On March 5, 1770, ironically the same day as the Boston Massacre, Parliament repealed most of the Townshend Acts while retaining the much-despised tax on imported tea.
The Townshend Acts played a crucial role in triggering the American Revolution in 1775. The Intolerable Acts, also known as the Coercive Acts, were 5 laws passed by the British Parliament in 1774 to punish the colonists after the Boston Tea Party.
First, the Boston Port Act closed the harbor until the colonists paid the King and the East India Company for the lost tea and taxes. Secondly, the Massachusetts Government Act revoked the charter of the royal colony and placed it under the control of Parliament.
The Administration of Justice Act, dubbed the Murder Act, was believed to allow British officials to act with impunity and escape justice. The Quartering Act required colonial officials to provide housing to British troops if needed.
Lastly, the Quebec Act greatly enlarged Quebec's borders and allowed for the free practice of Catholicism.
The Intolerable Acts were intended to isolate the radical voices in Massachusetts. Instead, the 13 colonies rallied around a common cause, liberty from the oppressive British rule, by boycotting British goods and convening the First Continental Congress in September 1774.